Chapter 25 of God's Country and the Woman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. God's Country and the Woman by James Oliver Curwood. Chapter 25. Many years before, Thoreau had named his airy stronghold the Eagle's Nest. The brown-faced people of the trails had changed it to Devil's Nest. It was not built like the posts, on level ground and easy of access. Its northern wall rose sheer up with the wall of Eagle Chasm, with a torrent 200 feet below that rumbled and roared like distant thunder when the spring floods came. John Adare knew that this chasm worked its purpose. Somewhere in it were the liquor caches which the police never found when they came that way on their occasional patrols. On the east and south sides of the Nest was an open, rough and rocky, filled with jagged outcrops of boulders and patches of bush. Behind it the thick forests grew up to the very walls. The forest people were 3/4 of a mile from this open when they came upon the trail of the lone caribou hunter. Where he had stood and looked up at them, the snow was beaten down. From that spot his black trail began first in a cautious, crouching retreat that changed swiftly into the long running steps of a man in haste. Like a dog, Kaskisoon hovered over the warm trail. His eyes glistened, and he held out his hands, palms downward, and looked at Adare. "The snow still crumbles in the footmarks," he said in Cree. "They are expecting us." Adare turned to the men behind him. "You who have brought axes, cut logs with which to batter in the doors," he said. "We will not ask them to surrender. We must make them fight, so that we may have an excuse to kill them. 2 logs for 8 men each. And you others fill your pockets with birch bark and spruce pitch knots. Let no man touch fire to a log until we have Josephine. Then burn! And you, Kaskisoon, go ahead and watch what is happening." He was calmer now. As the men turned to obey his commands, he laid a hand on Philip's shoulder. "I told you this was coming, boy," he said huskily. "But I didn't think it meant her. My God, if they have harmed her!" His breath seemed choking him. "They dare not," breathed Philip. John Adare looked into the white fear of the other's face. There was no hiding of it, the same terrible dread that was in his own. "If they should, we will kill them by inches, Philip," he whispered. "We will cut them into bits that the moose birds can carry away. Great God, they shall roast over fires." He hurried towards the men who were already chopping at spruce timber. Philip looked about for Jean. He had disappeared. 100 yards ahead of them he had caught up with Kaskisoon, and side by side the Indian and the half-breed were speeding now over the main trail. Perhaps in the hearts of these two, of all those gathered in this hour of vengeance, there ran deepest the thirst for blood. With Kaskisoon it was the dormant instinct of centuries of forebears roused now into fierce desire. With Jean it was necessity. In the face of John Adare's words there was to be no quarter. Jean still feared the possibility of a parley, a few minutes of truce, the meaning of which sent a shiver to the depths of his soul. He said nothing to the Cree, and Kaskisoon's lips were as silent as the great flakes of snow that began to fall about them now in a mantle so thick that it covered their shoulders in the space of 200 yards. When the timber thinned out, Kaskisoon picked his way with the caution of a lynx. At the edge of the clearing they crouched side by side behind a low windfall and peered over the top. 300 yards away was the Nest. The man whose trail they had followed had disappeared. And then suddenly the door opened, and there poured out a crowd of excited men. The lone hunter was ahead of them, talking and pointing toward the forest. Jean counted 8, 10, 11, and his eyes searched for Lang and Thoreau. He cursed the thick snow now. Through it he could not make them out. He had drawn back the hammer of his rifle. At the click of it Kaskisoon moved. He looked at the half-breed. His breath came in low monosyllable of understanding. Over the top of the windfall He poked the barrel of his gun. They looked again at Jean, and Jean turned. Their eyes met. They were eyes red and narrowed by the beat of storm. Jean Croisset knew what that silence meant. He might have spoken, but no word moved his lips. Unseen, his right hand made a cross over his heart. Deep in his soul he thought a prayer. Jean looked again at the huddled group about the door, and beside him there was a terrible silence. He held his breath. His heart ceased to beat. And then there came the crashing roar of the Cree's heavy gun, and one of the group staggered out with a shriek and fell face downward in the snow. Even then Jean's finger pressed lightly on the trigger of his rifle as he tried to recognize Lang. Another moment and a half dozen rifles were blazing in their direction. It was then that he fired. Once, twice, 6 times, as fast as he could pump the empty cartridges out of his gun and fresh ones into the chamber. With the 6th came again the thunderous roar of the Cree's single loader. "Pa, Kaskisoon!" cried Jean then. The last of Thoreau's men had darted back into the house. 3 of their number they had carried in their arms. A 4th stumbled and fell across the threshold. "Pa, we have done! Quick, Kistiaktuk!" He darted back over their trail, followed by the Cree. There would be no truce now. It was war. He was glad that he had come with Kaskisoon. 200 yards back in the forest they met Philip and Adare at the head of their people. "They were coming to ambush us when we entered the clearing," shouted Jean. "We drove them back. 4 fell under our bullets. The place is still full of the devils, M'sieur." "It will be impossible to rush the doors," cried Philip, seeing the gathering madness in John Adare's face. "We must fight with caution, Mon Pere. We cannot throw away lives. Divide our men. Let Jean take 12, and you another 12, and give Kaskisoon his own people. That will leave me 10 to batter in the doors. You can cover the windows with your fire while we rush across the open with the 1 log. There is no need for 2." "Philip is right," added the Missioner in a low voice. "He is right, John. It would be madness to attempt to rush the place in a body." Adare hesitated for a moment. His clenched hands relaxed. "Yes, he is right," he said. "Divide the men." 15 minutes later the different divisions of the little army had taken up their positions about the clearing. Philip was in the centre, with 8 of the youngest and strongest of the forest men waiting for the signal to dash forward with the log. First, on his right, was Jean and his men, and 200 yards beyond him the master of Adare, concealed in a clump of thick spruce. Kaskisoon and his braves had taken the windfalls on the left. As yet not a man had revealed himself to Thoreau and his band. But the dogs had scented them, and they stood watchfully in front of the long log building, barking and whining. From where he crouched Philip could see 5 windows. Through these would come the enemy's fire. He waited. It was Jean who was to begin, and draw the first shots. Suddenly the half breed and his men broke from cover. They were scattered, darting low among the boulders and bush, partly protected and yet visible from the windows. Philip drew himself head and shoulders above his log as he watched. He forgot himself in this moment when he was looking upon men running into the face of death. In another moment came the crash of rifles muffled behind log walls. He could hear the whine of bullets, the zip, zip, zip of them back in the spruce and cedar. Another 100 yards beyond Jean he saw John Adare break his cover like a great lion, his men spreading out like a pack of wolves. Swiftly Philip turned and looked to the left. Kaskisoon and his braves were advancing upon the Nest with the elusiveness of foxes. At first he could not see them. Then, as Adare's voice boomed over the open, they rose with the suddenness of a flight of partridges, and ran swift-footed straight into the face of the windows. Thus far the game of the attackers had worked without flaw. Thoreau and his men would be forced to divide their fire. It had taken perhaps 3/4 of a minute for the first forward rush of the 3 parties, and during this time the fire from the windows had concentrated upon Jean and his men. Philip looked toward them again. They were in the open. He caught his breath.